Well, I think many of you will agree that times are really tough for South Africans. The fuel price is up by R1 and we're in a technical recession. And this has left many companies, including our very own SABC, considering retrenchments in order to save costs and to keep the businesses afloat. So what does retrenchment actually entail and how should it be done? And what are some of the legalities around the procedures? I'm joined now in studio by Tebogo Moalusi, who is Industrial Relations Director at Workforce Staffing Solutions, and he's going to talk to us a little more about this. Thanks so much for coming through this morning. Now, Tebogo, if we look at the Labour Relations Act, it is very clear that retrenchment should be an act of last resort, and in addition to that, it is a process that should be fair. But very often people would agree that that is not the case because there's very little transparency when it comes to companies proving that this is in fact a last resort and it is a fair process. What has been your experience?
Sakina, I think you hit the nail on the button, I think, in terms of saying that some employers perhaps use retrenchments in the wrong context. Perhaps a company would say, listen, I've always wanted to get rid of Tebogo, for instance, and perhaps they would use the retrenchment process as perhaps a way in which they can get to him. But however, that's not how the law actually wrote out, and perhaps that's not the intentions of how processes like retrenchments were actually designed. From our perspective, and from perhaps our experiences, we always perhaps have observed relevant processes in as far as retrenchments are concerned, due to the fact that there's a lot of consequences to getting it wrong. If an employer gets it wrong, it can amount to actually a 12 months penalty from the CCMA or the Labour Court.
What are those processes? If a company has come to that decision, if they have explored all other options, what is the process that they should embark on?
All right. So when it comes to a retrenchment, the first thing that you do as an employer, you consult. Now, the next question that you need
What does that mean, consult?
So consult, it means like us sitting, talking. That's the first thing. All right. So now the question is, who do you consult with? It's either one, a workplace forum, if you have one in your organization, or two, you look at the collective agreement that you have with your trade union. If none of those exist, you need to consult with the workers. All right. Now, the next thing is what do you consult on? Because it's one thing sitting together, but what do we talk about? All right, then the law gives us 10 issues that we need to consult on. Number one, the reasons behind the retrenchment. Number two is the alternatives that you have sorted prior to actually embarking on this process. And then the number of people to be affected. Selection criteria, because you need to select the certain people who are going to be affected. It needs to be a fair selection. You can't pinpoint. It needs to be an unbiased selection. All right? And the timing of the retrenchment, as well as the severance packages, future employment, the number of people to be affected, and perhaps previous retrenchments that you have done in the last 12 months. All these factors you need to consult on. And as an employer, you need to write a letter to the consulting parties to say, come to the table, let's talk about it. Then in your engagements, you perhaps exchange ideas as to how you can avoid this process. And perhaps in that engagement, solutions can come. In certain instances, even employees have come up with suggestions to actually circumvent the retrenchment process or to minimize the impact thereof.
Let's talk a bit about that, because very often companies would resort to retrenchment as an option to cut costs, to save money. So what sort of alternative interventions could one possibly arrive at? All
right. I think as an employer, you need to perhaps think outside the box. It would depend on each and everybody's circumstance. But for an example, you can have a layoff where you lay off employees for a certain period, and when you know your business will recover at a certain stage, then bring them back. Short time, let them work lesser hours as opposed to them working the normal hours just to cut costs. And one other thing that actually works, when you have a TES, a temporary employment service provider, because what you'd have when you have a temporary employment service provider, they would have various other clients in their pool. So instead of people losing their jobs, the TES can place that individual in another client so that they do not suffer the loss of a job. So you can look at various other alternatives. Perhaps the only thing is that it needs to be fair and objective.
So, Tebogo, just if people want more information, because I'm sure there are many more questions, particularly, more pointed questions that people would have, where can they get more information?
All right. If perhaps everybody would need some advice and perhaps ways in which they can handle issues such as retrenchment, they're more than welcome to send me an email. Well, my email is Tebogo, it's Tebogomo @workforce.co.za.
Tebogo, M-O?
It's Tebogo, M-O,
at workforce.co.za. Tebogo, thanks so much for stopping by. And I'm sure, many people would be rushing to actually get in touch with you to ask some of those pointed questions. Thanks to Tebogo Moalusi, who is an Industrial Relations Director at Workforce Staffing Solutions, talking to us about retrenchments and the processes to embark on. Well, we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we'll say goodbye.